السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. ما بعد. Alhamdulillah, we're starting this book by Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala. And Alhamdulillah, we have a decent amount of time to finish it according to the schedule. So inshallah, we won't be rushing through anything. So today, inshallah, it's just going to be an introduction. And then next week, I won't be here. So Sheikh Abdullahi will be going over some review. And then the next week after that will be more introduction. There's a lot of introduction needed for this book and for Aqeedah in general. So today, we can start out first by just talking about what is Aqeedah and the importance of Aqeedah and how do we learn Aqeedah. So the word Aqeedah, the linguistic meaning of the word Aqeedah, and probably you guys have heard this in other classes a lot, when you're learning about a topic or any, branch of knowledge, usually you'll hear it defined in a linguistic meaning. And what the scholars mean when they say the linguistic meaning of something, when you hear this in Arabic, right? It means the root letters of that word, right? So every word in Arabic has root letters, and it's usually 3 root letters. So those 3 root letters have like a basic meaning. And then from that basic meaning of those root letters, there will branch off many derivatives that are related to that general meaning. So the aqada, the ain, qaf, and dal is used basically to like tie a rope, right? It's like aqad al-habl, right? Like that you tied a rope. And they say what it means is, when you tie a rope, what are you doing? Is you are basically, tightening one part to another, right? You tie a knot, you tighten one part to another. So the idea of anything that has this ain, qaf, and dal is that, things have become like it's tight and it's firm. This is the idea of it, right? So the Aqeedah, why is Aqeedah called Aqeedah? We know it means belief, because this is something that the person should firmly believe in, right? Just how like the rope is tightly firmed, the Aqeedah means you have firm belief in whatever this is. Now, when we're talking about Aqeedah in the deen, right? Because, you could say i'tiqad or Aqeedah, right? And it's more or less synonyms. It means belief. But what do we mean when we're saying we're learning Aqeedah or i'tiqad? What is the specific topics that us as Muslims go over? And it's based on the arkan of Iman. The hadith of Jibreel, when Jibreel alayhi salam, he asked the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, "Akhbirni an al-iman." Tell me about Iman. He said, "An tu'mina billahi wa malaikatihi wa kutubihi wa rusulihi wal yawmil akhir wa tu'mina bil qadri khayrihi wa sharri." So the Aqeedah is, we could say the basis of it is the arkan of Iman, the 6 pillars of Iman: belief in Allah, in the angels, in the books, in the messengers, in the hereafter, and in Qadr. Now, every one of these 6 pillars of belief has its own pillars, and from those pillars, there's branches. So, when we're talking about belief in angels, what does that mean, right? Belief in angels in a general sense, but also belief in specific angels and belief in all of the things that we've heard about angels from the book and the Sunnah. So same thing when it comes to belief in Allah, right? And belief in Allah means that we believe in Allah, but it means that we also believe in all of the names and attributes of Allah. And we believe in everything that we have been informed about by Allah in His book and on the tongue of His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So all of these things are basically, these are all ilmul ghaib, right? Ilmul ghaib means knowledge of the unseen. If it's something you can observe, then that's not Aqeedah, right? If somebody says, is it part of our Aqeedah to say that grass is green? No, that's not part of our Aqeedah. I can observe that, right? Aqeedah means that this is something from ilmul ghaib. It's something that I cannot deduce this through my 5 senses, but rather I believe it because I have been told this by Allah Azza wa Jal, وَمَنْ أَصْدَقُ مِنَ اللَّهِ قِيلًا, and there's none more truthful in speech than Allah. Or I've been told by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who is as-sadiqul masduq, the most truthful, right? So this is, we are informed about these matters of the unseen, and we believe it, aqeedah, with a firm belief, even though it's not something that we observe. And this is why, as a part of Islam, right? Part of Islam means that this is something I have a firm belief in it. I believe in this 100% with no shak, with no doubt, even though I didn't observe it myself. But because this has been told to me by Allah Azza wa Jal, and there's none more truthful in speech than Allah Azza wa Jal. So this is the idea of Aqeedah. Now, why do we, or what is the proof that studying Aqeedah is important? The proof is, look at the seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If you look at the first 13 years of the da'wah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there was very little ahkam. There was very little fiqh in those first 13 years, right? It was all tawheed and aqeedah. Belief in Allah, belief in the hereafter. That ingraining that aqeedah firmly in the hearts of the believers made them open to accept this ahkam, the different rulings and the different mu'amalat and ibadat. But a person who tries to, learn about fiqh and learn about other things without having a correct belief and a strong belief in Allah, this is the person who usually ends up going astray or having difficulties. So this is why Allah Azza wa Jal, when he was revealing to the Prophet ﷺ in the beginning, the revelation was all about tawheed and aqeedah. It wasn't until in Medina when more ahkam started coming. Yes, of course, salah existed, charity existed. There was rulings. It wasn't that there was no fiqh in the first 13 years, but the main focus was tawheed and aqeedah. So therefore, us as Muslims, the most important thing that we should do is learn tawheed and aqeedah. Make sure we have that correct belief in Allah. Not only that, a person who doesn't have the correct aqeedah usually goes, or we could say a person who doesn't know the correct aqeedah is usually going to go one of two ways. The first way is they understand that they don't have knowledge and they keep their mouth shut. Alhamdulillah, right? This is good. Right? If you don't have knowledge about something and you admit you don't have knowledge, you're jahil, right? You're ignorant because you don't have knowledge. And, we're all born ignorant. So there's nothing wrong with being ignorant at some point. Everybody's going to be ignorant until they seek knowledge, right? But the problem is the person who is jahil, who doesn't have knowledge, but they don't realize that they don't have knowledge. So the ulama, they call this jahil murakkab, right? Basically means ignorance on top of ignorance. Why? Because you're ignorant about a matter, and then you're ignorant about the fact that you're ignorant, right? So this is jahil murakkab, right? This person is like double ignorant. So usually what happens, right? A person who doesn't know aqeedah, again, right? One, they know they're ignorant and they don't say anything. But two is they don't realize that they don't know and they start talking and saying things about Allah Azza wa Jal which aren't true, right? If you don't know, if you don't have the correct aqeedah and you don't realize you don't know, then what are you going to do when somebody starts asking you questions about ilm al-ghaib, about things of the unseen? You're going to start guessing, or you're going to start basing things, what you heard from someone else. You're not sure if there's evidence, but you're going to say it anyway, right? So this leads a lot of people astray, because this speaking about Allah without knowledge is a very major sin. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُلْ إِنَّمَا حَرَّمَ رَبِّيَ الْفَوَاحِشَ مَا ظَهَرَ مِنْهَا وَمَا بَطَنَ وَالْإِثْمَ وَالْبَغْيَ بِغَيْرِ الْحَقِّ وَأَن تُشْرِكُوا بِاللَّهِ مَا لَمْ يُنَزِّلْ بِهِ سُلْطَانًا وَأَن تَقُولُوا عَلَى اللَّهِ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in this ayah in Surah Al-A'raf, mentioning different types of sin, say, my Lord has made haram upon me. قُلْ إِنَّمَا حَرَّمَ رَبِّيَ الْفَوَاحِشَ. My Lord has made a haram upon me, the fawahish, the shameful and disgusting acts, right? These are usually, they're sins, and they're, major sins and shameful sins, but it's usually things where we could, say, you're not doing dhulm to anybody, but you're doing something which is haram and shameful and disgusting, right? This is the fawahish. But then al-baghi, now you're doing a sin and you're doing some dhulm to the next person, right? So this is even worse, right? So al-fawahish is bad, but what is worse? Al-baghi, when you're doing a sin that now is harming someone else. And then after that, he mentioned shirk. وَأَن تُشْرِكُوا بِاللَّهِ مَا لَمْ يُنَزِّلْ بِهِ سُلْطَانًا. After al-baghi, after this next level of sin, committing shirk. What sin is worse than shirk? But in the ayah next, there's something mentioned next, which is speaking about Allah without knowledge. This is mentioned last in the ayah. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, he says in this ayah, Allah ta'ala mentions the sins in order from the least severe to the most severe. Now, we all know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَغْفِرُ أَن يُشْرَكَ بِهِ وَيَغْفِرُ مَا دُونَ ذَلِكَ لِمَن يَشَاءُ. Allah ta'ala doesn't forgive shirk, but He forgives other than that as He will. So if shirk is the worst of major sins, then how is it that shirk is mentioned number 3 and speaking about Allah without knowledge is mentioned number 4? How could Ibn al-Qayyim, rahimahullah ta'ala, this great alim, be saying that this is worse than shirk? Because the reality of it is shirk, right? Do you have a right to speak about Allah without knowledge? Do you have the right to say names and attributes of Allah without knowledge? Absolutely not. What is shirk? Shirk is you taking the rights of Allah and giving them to other than Allah. So speaking about Allah without knowledge is itself shirk. But why is it worse? Because now, that person who's sitting in their house worshiping the statue, yes, this is a mushrik. If they die upon this, they're, in eternity in the fire. But the person who speaks about knowledge, not only are they doing an act which is not their right to do, but they're also leading others astray as well, right? So now they've done even more damage because this shirk that they're doing, which is speaking about Allah without knowledge, is also manipulating and leading others astray and causing other people to also speak about Allah without knowledge. So it's very dangerous, for these people who don't have knowledge of Aqeedah, but they still speak about it. So anyway, the reason I mention it is just, so we understand it is very important for us to learn our Aqeedah. A lot of people, when they're, first wanting to learn about the deen, they want to learn tafsir, they want to learn fiqh, because these are, what we could say kind of interesting subjects. And they think fiqh is a practical subject and Aqeedah is not a practical subject. This is how people think. But in actuality, right, what is more practical than strengthening your iman? Right? Every time you make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, why do you make dua to Allah? Because Allah ta'ala hears your dua. Right? Knowing that Allah ta'ala hears what you are saying in your dua, that's Aqeedah, right? Knowing that Allah ta'ala is all-knowing, all-hearing, that's part of Aqeedah. Right? So learning these things is part of having the correct Aqeedah. Okay, so now we've established the importance of learning Aqeedah, but now the question comes, right? Because there's a lot of different people teaching different Aqeedahs. How do we know what the correct Aqeedah is? So something I said, if anyone was in the class Shaykh Sunnah al-Muzani, the last Aqeedah class that we did, I said something at the beginning of that, which I'm going to say again, which is Aqeedah. The correct Aqeedah is very easy. There is no topic easier than Aqeedah. If you look in this book, Al-Aqeedah al-Wasitiyyah, the people who have the book, and you just flip through it, you'll find pages and pages in a row that's just ayat. It's just Quran. If you've memorized the Quran, this book will be super easy for you to memorize because at least half of it is just ayat that you already know, right? It's just memorizing the order that he mentions them in. And then, yes, there's a hadith. At the beginning, there's about a page or half a page, which is the words of the author himself. And at the end, there's a few pages which are the words of the author himself. But the majority of it, ayat, ahadith. That's it. And even with that, it's still one of the best books on Aqeedah. Why? Because this is our Aqeedah. Allah Ta'ala says this, read the ayah, you know what the ayah means? That's it. You have the correct Aqeedah. No others footnotes needed. Read the ayah, understand what it means, and that's the correct Aqeedah. What is easier than reading the Quran, understanding what it means, and saying, okay, I believe in that? Reading the authentic ahadith and saying, I believe in that. Aqeedah only becomes difficult when somebody reads these ayat and these ahadith and says, this doesn't make sense to me. If Allah Ta'ala is saying this, then wouldn't that imply that? So therefore, that can't mean that. It must mean something else. Right? The person who thinks that every ayah requires a footnote, this is the person who's making Aqeedah difficult. The person who says, if you believe in this ayah, if you believe in the ayah as it is, without a footnote, then you're committing kufr. Right? This is the premise of the Mu'attilah, the people who deny the names and attributes of Allah. This is the premise of their entire Aqeedah, is that if you believe in the Quran and the Sunnah as it is, without any, that actually means this, without any footnote, it means that, then they're saying that is kufr. The zahir of the Quran and Sunnah is kufr. So they say, and then they're going to use logically, why do they think that's kufr? So now, Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, the ones who believe in the Quran and Sunnah as it is, now what do? Well, now we have to respond to what they're saying. Because they're making this claim that we're not allowed to believe in the apparent meaning of the Quran and Sunnah. And they've made a logical argument of why we're not allowed to believe in the apparent meaning of the Quran and Sunnah. But we're Muslims, we believe in the Quran and Sunnah. So therefore, we have to logically refute them. We have to refute every claim that these people have made. So now what happens? Now you're having these books of Aqeedah, which are almost like books of philosophy, because it becomes a logical argument from one side to the other. This is not necessary, right? It's not necessary if we believe in the Quran and Sunnah as it is. It only becomes necessary when these people made a claim and now someone has to refute them. So now you find, books from the scholars of the Sunnah that are written in a logical manner because they're refuting claims made by other people who were trying to say you're not allowed to believe in the zahir of the Quran or the zahir of the Sunnah. For example, Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala. You see this book, al-Aqeedah al-Wasitiyyah, it's just ayat and ahadith. It's like pure Aqeedah. But he has other books, al-Aqeedah al-Tadmuriyah or al-Risalat al-Tadmuriyah, which is more logical based. Right? Same thing, one of his best students, Ibn al-Qayyim, rahimahullah ta'ala, has a book, As-Sawa'iq al-Mursala. It's a very thick book, and it's, and of course he's using ayat and ahadith, but it's a logical refutation of the Mu'attila, the people who deny the names and attributes of Allah. But the point is, this is not necessary, right? Imagine, these philosophical discussions that these people, these Mu'attila, the ones who deny the attributes of Allah, and then the Ahlus Sunnah who affirm the attributes of Allah, this logical discussion between them. Do you think these, the old illiterate people of the past, Muslims, even, think about your great-grandparents or something like that. Do you think they understood these arguments? Do you think they were engaging in these? No, they read the Quran and Sunnah, and they believed in the Quran and Sunnah. And that is Iman. That is the correct Aqeedah. They read the Quran and Sunnah and they believed in it. That is the correct Aqeedah. This is why you'll find a lot of the Ahlul Kalam. Ahlul Kalam are these people who engage in these, philosophical discussions. They just spend pages and pages talking and not relying on the text. So a lot of the people who engaged in this kalam, when they would die, they would say, I wish that I died upon the Aqeedah of the old ladies of Naysabur. They basically mean, those old women who didn't study anything about Aqeedah, like your grandma. That's what they mean, right? What did I get out of my 20 years of every single ayah trying to pick it apart and make a doubt, respond to the doubt, make another doubt, respond to the doubt, right? This is their books. فَإِنْ قِيلَ قُلْنَا فَإِنْ قِيلَ قُلْنَا. If they say this, we would say this. And then if they say this, we would say this. And this is it. Pages and pages of this. And in the end, they've created more doubts than they have answers. But their grandma, she believed in the ayat and the ahadith and died as a mu'minah, right? So these scholars, they would basically make this tawbah at the end of their life, saying, I wish that I had died upon the Aqeedah of the women of Naysabur. Like Fakhruddin al-Razi, al-Ghazali. It's been reported that they died with saying these types of statements. So, inshallah, if we wanted to rush through this book, we could do it. Right? We could do it because we just read the ayat and ahadith, translate it and believe in it, and that's it. But since those doubts have been presented, the doubts have to be responded to. So, just a quick little basically premise that we're going to follow, or, how are we going to study Aqeedah and how are we going to study this book, is that we affirm for Allah Azza wa Jal whatever He affirms for Himself in His book or on the tongue of His messenger. So this is affirmation. Affirmation means that we don't deny it. So denial of names and attributes is called ta'til. Ta'til, so ta'ain, ta, ya lam. Ta'til means to deny something. This is why the people who deny the names and attributes of Allah are called mu'attila. Mu'attila means a person who has done ta'til. Okay, so now, if we're affirming for Allah and his, whatever He has affirmed for Himself in names and attributes, and we're not doing ta'til, who are the mu'attila? How can a person do ta'til? So the first thing we need to know who these groups are and what their methodologies are, or what their aqeedas are. So the first one that you'll hear mentioned is al-Jahmiyyah. So al-Jahmiyyah is a group, or this name comes from, the person who kind of promoted this ideology in the beginning, named Jahm ibn Safwan. So Jahm ibn Safwan, he denied the names and attributes of Allah. So the Jahmiyyah are the ones who deny the names and attributes of Allah. So then later, right, some people start logically arguing with the Jahmiyyah, right? Rather than saying, you guys are disbelieving in what is in the Quran and Sunnah. No, now they're going to have a logical argument with them. And they say, our logic actually allows us to accept the names of Allah, but we can't accept the attributes of Allah. So these people are called the Mu'tazila. Of course, there's a lot of other problems in the Aqeedah from these groups, but we're just talking about the names and attributes. So the Mu'tazila, they say, no, we can accept the names of Allah, but we can't accept the attributes of Allah. So for example, Allah Ta'ala is Ar-Rahman. We accept that Ar-Rahman is the name of Allah, but we don't accept that Allah has the attribute of Rahman, of mercy. Meaning the name is just the name. The name doesn't indicate any sifat. It doesn't indicate any attributes. Names are just names. So this is the Mu'tazila. Then after them, there's many groups, but we're going to say just for now the Ash'ariyah, right? The Ash'aris. They say, no, our logic actually allows us to accept 7 attributes of Allah. We accept that Allah Ta'ala has the attribute of hayah, that Allah Ta'ala has the attribute of life, and that Allah Ta'ala has the attribute of ilm, of knowledge, and that Allah Ta'ala has the attribute of qudra, of capability, and that Allah Ta'ala has the attribute of irada, meaning that Allah Ta'ala chooses, and that Allah Ta'ala has the attribute of as-sam', that Allah Ta'ala hears, the attribute of al-basar, that Allah Ta'ala sees, and the attribute of kalam. These are the 7 attributes that the Ash'ariyah accept. So they say, our logic allows us to accept these 7 attributes. And we accept all the names of Allah. Anything other than those 7 attributes, we need to make ta'weel of it. We need to interpret it in a way that it actually means one of those 7. Right? So now they accept for Allah Ta'ala the attribute of irada, that Allah Ta'ala makes choices. But they don't accept that Allah has the attribute of hub, that Allah loves, or al-bughd, that Allah hates, or that Allah has the attribute of rahmah, mercy. Right? They don't accept these attributes. They say, no, when Allah Ta'ala says mercy, what it means is irada, that Allah wants, chooses good for that person. We accept that Allah Ta'ala has the attribute of irada, but we can't accept He has the attribute of mercy. Right? So this is the basically different shades of the Mu'attila. Right? So therefore we say that we need to accept the names of Allah Ta'ala, and we don't do ta'til, and we also don't do ta'weel. And Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala, as we're going to see, and we'll talk more about it in that first page, he actually calls it tahrif. But what it means is basically pretending to accept it, but you're not actually accepting it. You're making ta'weel, you're distorting it to say it means something else. Like mercy, right? Like I accept that Allah Ta'ala has the attribute of mercy, but mercy doesn't mean mercy. Mercy means irada. So you don't accept that He has the attribute of mercy, right? You accept He has the attribute of irada, but not mercy, right? This is yeah. So yeah, irada is Arabic, like from when you say, so in Arabic, if you say like yuridu, it means like he wants something, right? So arada yuridu means to want. So irada is like the masdar, the gerund of that, mean like to the attribute of to being able to want or to make choices. And basically the idea, right, the logical idea, why can they accept this attribute? Because they say, okay, well, Allah Ta'ala created everything. And if we look around the creation, there's different things. Some people are tall, some people are short, some things are sweet, some things are bitter, right? So the fact that there's different things means that Allah Ta'ala chooses for some things to be like this and some things to be like that, right? Which means Allah Ta'ala has the attribute of irada. Right? Not because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran uses the verb yuridu for himself. No, we're not accepting it because of that. Accepting it because logically we can visualize the irada of Allah. Right? This is how all of the 7 attributes that they accept, this is the idea that we can logically prove these 7 attributes. Okay? So, but Ahlul Sunnah says we can prove all of the attributes of Allah. Those 7 and every other attribute because we have Quran and Sunnah, and that's enough for us. Then the next one, and right, someone might be saying, well, why are they denying attributes? Why are these Mu'attila denying attributes of Allah? Right? They're Muslims, right? They believe in the Quran and Sunnah. Why would they be denying the attributes of Allah? Right? These shubuhat exist, right? It's not that this is just some person who just woke up one day and said, I don't want to believe in the Quran and Sunnah. No, there's shubuhat that led them to this. So number 3 is that we don't do tamthil. We don't liken Allah to his creation. And this is based on the statement of Allah Azza wa Jal, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. There's nothing like him. So now, the Mu'attila, the people who deny the attributes of Allah, they say, well, look, Allah Ta'ala says, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. And if you're saying Allah Ta'ala has Rahman, has the attribute of Rahman, then you're likening Allah to his creation, right? Just like this, mother has Rahmah for her child. So you're saying Allah Ta'ala has rahmah the way that the mother has rahmah? We're saying no, Allah Ta'ala has rahmah in a way that befits his majesty. But Allah Ta'ala affirmed it. They said, but no, that if you affirm that Allah has rahmah, that necessitates that you're likening Allah to his creation. This is their argument, right? Okay, and we'll get to the response to it in a second. The last one, right? So we have these 4 rules: no ta'til, no ta'wil or tahrif, no tamthil, likening Allah to his creation. It's also sometimes said tashbih. Tashbih and tamthil basically means likening one thing to another. And the last one is no takyif. Takyif comes from the word kayfa, right? Like kayfa halak, how are you? So kayfa, how. So takyif basically means asking how or trying to explain how. And the reason for that is because you can never know how Allah Ta'ala is, right? All you can know about Allah is what Allah Ta'ala has told you about himself. So if a person says, here's Allah Ta'ala has the attribute of Rahman. So how can Allah have Rahman? Or how does the Rahmah of Allah happen? We don't do this because there's no way we can know. All we can know is what Allah Azza wa Jal has told about himself. And it's related to Laysa kamithlihi shay. There's nothing like him. Because when you accept that Allah, you have never seen Allah, and you accept that there's nothing like Allah, then that means you can't know anything about Allah except what Allah Ta'ala tells you about himself. And this is, the truth for every single thing everything you can know, or even no matter how good your imagination is, whatever you can picture, you're only basing it on things that you've experienced, or things that you've experienced which are similar to it, and then you can make analogies and comparison and in that regard, or somebody has told you about something. Those are the only 3 ways that you can know anything, how something is. So when it comes to the names and attributes of Allah, we believe in, we have not seen Allah, so we can't know how Allah's attributes are based on that. Nothing is like Allah, so we can't compare Allah to his creation. And lastly, when it comes to what Allah Ta'ala has informed us about himself, we stop there. And this is it, right? So you can't do takyif. You can't say, how is it this? How is that? Right? So now, okay, the question comes up, right? If we as Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, if we accept laysa kamithlihi shay, there's nothing like him, then how can we affirm these attributes? So the same question could be posed to all of the Mu'attila as well, right? Starting with the Ash'ira or the Maturidiyya or any of the others who say we accept a specific amount of attributes and we deny the rest. So if you go to this person who accepts the attribute of, let's say, for example, as-sam', that Allah can hear. You say, if you accept that Allah can hear, well, we as the creation, we can also hear as well. So doesn't that mean that you're likening Allah Ta'ala to the creation by saying that Allah can hear? Because I can hear, you can hear. So if you say Allah can hear, then you're likening Allah to the creation. They say, no. the hearing of Allah is not like the hearing of His creation. We say, yes, we agree with you. And we also say the rahmah of Allah is not like the rahmah of His creation. They say, well, but our logic told us that Allah Ta'ala has the attribute of hearing. And our logic doesn't tell us that Allah Ta'ala has the attribute of rahmah. And we say, okay, well, if your logic is the reason you're denying rahmah, the Mu'tazila, their logic caused them to deny hearing. So if logic denies it, then why are we making your logic the one that the thing which dictates affirmation and negation? Why don't we take the logic of the Mu'tazila? Or why don't we take the logic of the Jahmiyyah who deny the names and attributes? Right? So the fact of the matter goes back to you are affirming the attribute and you are able to make this answer that we affirm it in a way befitting the majesty of Allah. So we say, if that is the case, then you need to do this to all of the attributes of Allah. And this is one of the principles that Ibn Taymiyyah mentions in his book, Al-Risalatu Tadmuriyah. Whatever you say about one attribute, you need to say that about all of the attributes. So if you say, I can affirm these 7 attributes, but in a way that does not resemble the attributes of the creation, then you affirm all of the attributes in a way that does not resemble the attributes of the creation. So then the Jahmiyyah might come and say, well, that argument is fine for them. That argument works for the Ash'ariyah who affirm some attributes. But what about us? What about us, Jahmiyyah? We don't deny any of the attributes. So how are you going to respond to us? The question to them is, do you affirm that Allah Ta'ala exists? And they would say, yes, we affirm that Allah Ta'ala exists. You say, do we exist? Yes, we exist. So haven't you likened Allah Ta'ala to His creation by affirming that He has existence and affirming that we have existence? Of course not, right? The existence of Allah is not like the existence of us. So whatever you say about the that of Allah, about the being of Allah, you need to also say about the sifat of Allah. And this is the second principle that Ibn Taymiyyah mentions. Whatever you say about the being of Allah, you say about the sifat of Allah, the attributes of Allah. And then even if they said, right, if they say, well, in that case, we're not even going to use the word existence for Allah, right? Let's say they were to say that. Then what have they done? Now they've likened Allah to al-adam. They've likened Allah to inexistence, right? So when you deny any attribute for Allah, you're trying to avoid likening Allah to the creation, but you've ended up likening Allah to inexistence, right? Or likening Allah to something lacking in the creation, right? So for example, if you say you can't accept that Allah Ta'ala has the attribute of hearing and seeing, because that would mean you're likening Allah to His creation. Okay, this water bottle, can it hear and see? No, right? So I've negated hearing and seeing for this. So me negating hearing and seeing for Allah, does that mean I'm likening Allah to the water bottle? Right? So this is the thing. Whatever you ran from in this direction, you're going to end up on it on the other direction. So what is the solution? The solution is to affirm whatever Allah Ta'ala affirms for Himself in the Quran and Sunnah in a way that is befitting the majesty of Allah. And it is nothing like that of the creation. So when Allah Ta'ala affirms for Himself the attribute of face, the attribute of hands, or whatever other attributes are affirmed in the Quran and Sunnah, then this doesn't mean we're likening Allah to His creation, but rather it means we affirm for Allah whatever He affirms for Himself in a way befitting the majesty of Allah. So now, another logical way to look at this, or another important point, right? If let's say these Mu'attila, they came and say, well, if you're saying this, right? If you're saying that Allah Ta'ala has a face or has hands or has, whatever other things that you're saying, you took from the Quran and Sunnah, right? Because we're saying Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala says clearly in the Quran to Iblis, مَا مَنَعَكَ أَن تَسْجُدَ لِمَا خَلَقَتُ بِيَدَيْ. What prevented you from prostrating to the one I've created with my 2 hands? They say, well, that means that if you believe Allah Ta'ala has 2 hands, you believe in the ayah as it is, without a footnote, and you don't believe hand means this or that, right? Hand means qudra, or hand means ni'mah, or whatever it is, then that's kufr, right? This is what they say. It's kufr to believe that. So now the question is, right? That means believing in the zahir of the Quran, according to them, believing in the Quran as it came without any footnotes means that this person has disbelief. So you could say, well, how is it that Allah Ta'ala could reveal these ayat where the zahir of it, the apparent meaning of it, is disbelief? And they would say, because a person who knows the Arabic language and a person who understands the logic will easily understand that Allah can't have hands. Will easily understand that hand must mean qudra, right? And they'll, they might mention, in the Arabic language, how sometimes hand is used to mean power, capability, or ni'mah, benefit. And, they might, and then they'll give their pages long arguments of logically why it is. So the question is, okay, right? You're claiming that the zahir of the ayah means this, but a person who has this deep knowledge of Arabic language and deep knowledge of logic will be able to come to that conclusion. But could every single Muslim who reads this come to this conclusion? Now, imagine, right? When were these ayat revealed, right? When was the Quran first revealed? Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam tells about the situation in the Jahiliyyah. He, in a long hadith in Sahih Muslim, he says, فَنَظَرَ اللَّهُ إِلَى أَهْلِ الْأَرْضِ فَمَقَتَهُمْ عَجَمَهُمْ وَعَرَبَهُمْ إِلَّا بَقَايَا مِنْ أَهْلِ الْكِتَابِ. Right? There was a period where Allah Ta'ala looked at all of the people of the earth and hated them. The Arabs and the non-Arabs, except for a small group of people from Ahlul Kitab, meaning people were in the most severe state of Jahiliyyah. People were worshipping statues. Some of the Sahaba, they would laugh about how jahil they were before Islam. That they would, make an idol out of dates and worship it, and then later get hungry and eat that same statue. This is the Jahiliyyah that these Arabs were in. Right? They spoke Arabic, they understood Arabic, they were logical, intelligent people, but absolute Jahiliyyah. So you're telling me these people whose Aqeedah was so corrupt that a Quran could be revealed where the zahir of it was kufr, and those people were able to distinguish and interpret the ayat in the correct way, right? If they had that ability, then why were they upon that Jahiliyyah in the first place? But rather the Quran came to take them out of the darkness of Jahiliyyah and bring them into the light. So if this Quran, which was take these people out of the darkest depths of Jahiliyyah and bring them into the light, but the zahir of it is kufr, how can that be possible? How could a person who is in that depth of Jahiliyyah figure out that no, this ayah doesn't actually mean Allah has hands, it must mean He has qudra, right? The same person who made a statue out of dates, you think would make that jump? No, right? The fact of the matter is that the Sahaba reached the level they reached because they submitted to the Quran and they believed in the Quran and the Sunnah as it is. This is why one of the great scholars of the Tabi'een, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, and I think everyone's heard of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, he said a very famous quote, and this is a quote which it's important for everyone from that time until Yawm al-Qiyamah. He said, قِفْ حَيْثُ وَقَفَ الْقَوْمِ. Right? So remember, he's a Tabi'i. So that means the only generation before him is the Sahaba, right? So he says, قِفْ حَيْثُ وَقَفَ الْقَوْمِ. Stop wherever the people stopped. Which people is he talking about? He's talking about the Sahaba. What is he talking about? He's talking about Aqeedah, right? That's what he means. Stop where they stopped. They read the ayat of Sifat, and they read it as it is and believed it as it is, and they didn't say it actually means this, it actually means that. Stop where the people stopped. And then he says, فَإِنَّهُمْ عَلَىٰ عِلْمٍ وَقَفُوا وَبِبَصَرٍ نَافِذٍ كَفُّوا. Because they stopped based on knowledge, right? They didn't stop based on ignorance. It's not that you, this person, this Ash'ari 400 years later, you're more intelligent than the Sahaba. No, they didn't stop because they were incapable. They were perfectly capable. He says, because they stopped based on knowledge and they refrained based on clear insight. And he says, وَلَهُمْ فِي كَشْفِهَا وَلَهُمْ فِي كَشْفِهَا كَانُوا أَحْرَى كَانُوا أَقْوَى وَبِالْفَضْلِ لَوْ كَانَ فِيهَا أَحْرَى. And he said, and they were, if there was something to uncover, right? If there was something else to uncover, they were the most capable of it. And if there was some virtue in this discussion, meaning the discussion that these people of Kalam are getting, if there was any virtue in this discussion, those Sahaba would have been the most eager to do that, to have that discussion, right? You know, the people were talking pages and pages about logically why we can't say hand means hand. They're saying because, you know, if there was any benefit in that discussion, the Sahaba would have been the first to do it, and they would have been the most capable of doing it. But they didn't, right? قِفْ حَيْثُ وَقَفَ الْقَوْمِ. Stop where the people stop. And then he says, فَإِن قُلْتُمْ, right? Umar ibn Abdul Aziz says, فَإِن قُلْتُمْ حَدَثَ بَعْدَهُمْ فَمَا أَحْدَثَهُ إِلَّا مَنْ خَالَفَ هَدْيَهُمْ وَرَغِبَ عَنْ سُنَّتِهِمْ. He says, but if you say this discussion, this is something that occurred after them, then say the one who innovated this, the one who made this occur, is just a person who was not pleased with their sunnah and who is differing with them, right? Meaning, yes, this did occur after them, but this didn't occur after them because of a need. No, this occurred after them because of this, the people not being pleased with the statements of the Sahaba and the discussion and the knowledge of the Sahaba. And then he says, فَمَا فَوْقَهُمْ مُحَصِّرْ وَمَا دُونَهُمْ مُقَصِّرْ. And he said, whatever you say that is more than the Sahaba said, you've basically ruined it. Whatever you say less than them, then you've fallen short, right? Meaning the way that the Sahaba are, this is the best. فَإِنَّهُمْ فِيمَا بَيْنَ ذَلِكَ عَلَى صِرَاطٍ مُسْتَقِيمٍ. That they are in between, exaggeration and falling short. They're in between that upon as-siratul mustaqim. Right? So this is the aqeedah of the Sahaba. This is the aqeedah of the Salaf after them, to affirm what Allah Ta'ala has affirmed for Himself in the book and in the Sunnah. So we have about 15 more minutes. We need to catch Salatul Maghrib. So inshallah, this discussion will continue, of course, throughout the book. But this is just kind of an introduction of how to understand the correct aqeedah. So we'll use the last 15 minutes just to talk about the author of the book. And this is, the case, any book that you're studying, it's very important to know who the author of the book is. A lot of times people study a book and you ask them who's the author and they can't even answer this question. So, this is definitely the author's right upon us. So Shaykh al-Islam, Abu al-Abbas, Taqiyuddin, Ahmad ibn Abd al-Halim, ibn Abd al-Shams, ibn Abdullah, ibn Taymiyyah, al-Harrani, thumma al-Dimashqi. So this is kind of what you can memorize from his name. So Shaykh al-Islam. What does Shaykh al-Islam mean? This is his title. It's not like he's the only person ever called Shaykh al-Islam. You'll find, if you read in books of biography, you'll see this word is used a lot. There can be multiple people in a time called Shaykh al-Islam, right? It's not like, this is something specifically for this person. But this is basically a title that when the people say this, what they mean is, this is someone who is not just a sheikh in fiqh or in hadith or in lugha, but basically every branch of knowledge, he has mastered it, right? He's a sheikh in hadith like he was a muhaddith, as if he's a specialist in hadith. He's a sheikh in fiqh as if he's a faqih, right? In every branch of knowledge. This is what they mean when they say Shaykh al-Islam. So for Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah ta'ala, to really illustrate why is he called this? One of his contemporaries, Kamaluddin az-Zamlakani, right? This is someone slightly older than Ibn Taymiyyah, right? This is not his student. You'll find students praising their teachers a lot, right? But contemporaries praising each other, this is rare, right? Because that jealousy that exists. So he says, لو سئل في أي فن من العلم من العلوم لظن الرائي والسامع أنه لا يعرف غير ذلك. He says, when he was asked about any branch of knowledge, the people who see him and listen to him would think he doesn't know anything other than that, right? So imagine this, right? A person who spends their entire life studying one subject. That person is going to be an expert in that subject. But since they've devoted so much time to that subject, usually they're kind of ignorant on other things, right? So he's saying Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah ta'ala, that's how he was on every subject, right? When you heard him answer a question in fiqh, you think he's never studied anything other than that one subject you asked him about. A person who, the people who do their PhD, right? When they do their doctorate, right? They have a very specific topic, right? Like you do your PhD in engineering, right? You don't just write a paper about engineering. You write a paper about a very specific mas'ala in engineering, right? So he's saying about Ibn Taymiyyah, whatever he's answering, You think that's how he is, right? He's only studied that. This is like a person who has a PhD and has wrote his dissertation in every single mas'ala that exists. That's how his knowledge was. Right? That's how the people described him. And there's other descriptions like this. Ibn Daqiq al-Eid. Ibn Daqiq al-Eid, I think, maybe many people have heard of him. He was a very big scholar, big faqih. So Ibn Daqiq al-Eid, he met Ibn Taymiyyah. He was also older than Ibn Taymiyyah, right? He's like a Shaykh of Ibn Taymiyyah, or, from the generation of the Shuyukh of Ibn Taymiyyah. He says, لما اجتمعت بابن تيمية رأيت رجلا العلوم كلها بين عينيه يأخذ منه ما شاء ويدع ما شاء. He says, when I met Ibn Taymiyyah, I saw a man who all of the knowledge was right in front of him, and he could take from it what he wills and leave what he wills. And Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah ta'ala, even one time he was asked, and he kind of, he would close his eyes when he was giving a lecture, and they'd say, why is he doing that? And he says, when he closes it, he can basically see the pages in front of him, and he can just quote from it like this. Some people say, oh, well, we could never be like that. He has photographic memory. Ibn Taymiyyah himself, rahimahullah ta'ala, and we'll talk about this in the next class, but he says, I forgot this, I forgot that, right? He talks about things that, he forgot. Why do we see so many ulama of the past that are described like this, as if they had some kind of photographic memory? Many of them were, they didn't actually have photographic memory, right? But it was as if they did because of the amount of time that they spent. Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah ta'ala, his life was about 67 years old. And Nawawi, rahimahullah ta'ala, Imam al-Nawawi, 45 years old. This is how long he lived. Right? This is a very young age to die, but look at his works. Both of these, they didn't get married. Not because they had any aversion to the sunnah of the Prophet, but because their whole lives was just an immersion in knowledge. Nothing else but ilm. Now, I'm not saying at all encouraging people to not get married. Of course, this is half of our deen, right? But if we had even a fraction of the love for this deen and the ilm that those imam had, we would surpass everybody around us, right? You would be the alim of Seattle if you had even 5% of the dedication that these imam have, right? It's not because Allah Ta'ala gave them some brain that is not like your brain. No, they're human beings. Imam al-Bukhari, rahimahullah ta'ala, one time he was asked, I know I'm kind of going on a tangent here, but Imam al-Bukhari, rahimahullah, and we all know Imam al-Bukhari, right? The Imam of Hadith, the Hafiz of this ummah, right? He was asked one time about, somebody said there was a rumor that you drink balazur. So balazur was a type of drink, that a lot of the people would drink in order to increase their memory. It's kind of like herbal medicine, but it would do some damage to their stomach. Like if you drink a lot of it, it caused people problems, right? So they would actually knowingly, like they'd be okay with health problems in order to increase their memory. So some people came up to Imam al-Bukhari, you must drink balazur because, nobody has a memory like you. And he says, I don't know about that, right? I don't drink that. I don't know anything about some remedy to take to make you have better memorization. So the man, he starts walking away. Imam al-Bukhari says, come back. He says, actually, I know two things. There's two things you can do to have this kind of memory. He says, كثرة الاطلاع في الكتب وكبير الهمة. Right? Two things. One is to constantly be looking in the books, and the other thing is to have the strong desire. That's it. Anybody who has those two things will become a hafiz. Hafiz of Quran, hafiz of hadith, of fiqh, whatever it is. But think about our days, right? How much time are you actually spending in your day trying to memorize these types of books and learning these masail, right? If we're spending 1 hour out of 24 hours in our day, then we can't complain, oh, Allah Ta'ala didn't give me photographic memory, right? Even if He did, that just means you're going to, memorize all the social media that you're looking through, right? These ulama, they spent their entire lives with this knowledge, with these books. So anyway, this is Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah ta'ala. And his family, if we look at his lineage, right? So again, he's Ahmed, and he's Ibn Abdul Halim. So his father is Abdul Halim, and his grandfather is Abdul Salam. So his grandfather, Abdul Salam, is a huge alim from the Hanbali madhab. There's many books that are written by his grandfather that are, reference points in the Hanbali madhab. In fact, I think a lot of people are familiar with the book Nailul Awtar by Ash-Shawkani, right? This is a very famous book, Nailul Awtar by Ash-Shawkani. Nailul Awtar is a sharh of a hadith book by the grandfather of Ibn Taymiyyah, right? So it's very famous, right? It's not like an obscure scholar. He's if you read any Hanbali books, you'll find him as referred constantly. So his grandfather, his kunya was Abu Barakat, and his title was Majduddin, and his name is Abdus Salam ibn Abdullah, right? So this is the family that he came from. So his grandfather was a huge alim of the Hanbali madhab. His grandfather taught his father, Abdul Halim, who was also an alim, but didn't quite reach the level of the grandfather. And then Ahmed, the grandson, Taqiyuddin, the Shaykh al-Islam, surpassed them both. So some of the scholars, they describe them. They says he is, meaning Ibn Taymiyyah, the author of this book, he is a Shams. He's the sun. Or he's a Shams. He's a sun. And the father, he's a Najm. He's a star. And the grandfather is Qamar, the moon, right? Meaning in brightness, right? The star, that's something, right? But it's not as bright as the moon. And then the moon is not as bright as the sun, right? So they say, Ahmed, he's the Shams. The father, he's the Najm, and the grandfather, he's the Qamar. So anyway, this is, the Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah ta'ala, this is the family he came from. So now what does Ibn Taymiyyah mean, right? Because we usually think, that means his father was Taymiyyah. No, actually somewhere in his lineage, and really, we're not really sure, this is just theories that people have made. Some of them say that one of his great-great-grandmothers was named Taymiyyah, and this would sometimes, if there was a pious woman in the family, then the son would be called after his mother, right? So somewhere along the line, there was a mother who was named Taymiyyah, and then the family started being called after her, right? So they got this family name Ibn Taymiyyah. This is one theory. Another theory is that it was one of his grandfathers, right, was making Hajj. And when he made Hajj, he passed by a place called Taymiyyah. And when he passed by this place called Taymiyyah, he saw this baby girl who was born. And then he went back home, and his wife gave birth to a daughter. And that daughter reminded him of the little girl that he saw in Taymiyyah, and he said, Ya Taymiyyah, Ya Taymiyyah. So he started calling that girl Taymiyyah. So then they started calling the family Ibn Taymiyyah. Allahu Alam, right? But anyways, it's a family name. It's not like the name of his father or mother or anything like that. Okay, so we talked about him, his father, his grandfather, the name Ibn Taymiyyah, the name Shaykh al-Islam, Abu al-Abbas, this is his kunya, even though, as we said, he wasn't married, so he didn't actually have a child named Abbas. It's okay to have a kunya, even if you're not married. Next, Al-Harrani. Al-Harrani, this is where he was born. So he was born in the year 661 in the city of Harran. It's you can look it up, Google Harran. It's in southern Turkey, right on the border by Syria, so in modern-day Turkey. And there's actually, I was looking at the, pictures, because there's inhabitants there now, but they have like an old city. It was abandoned for a while. So there's the buildings from around the time of Ibn Taymiyyah. Because when Ibn Taymiyyah was about 7 years old, the Mongols invaded his town and they had to flee to Damascus. That's why he said, ثُمَّ الدِّمَشْقِي, right? So he ended up living in Damascus. So Allahu A'lam, those buildings are probably the buildings that were there in the time of Ibn Taymiyyah. So, people can see that, of course. So then after Damascus, of course, he sought knowledge, and then he, studied with many of the big mashayikh of his time, including his father. And then, he became an alim and taught, and he went through several trials during his teaching, and he ended up being imprisoned multiple times. About 7 times he went to prison, not because he was rebelling against the government, not because he's a criminal, but because of the rasail and the fatawa that he was giving. So he went to prison one time because of this book, Al-Aqeedah al-Wasitiyyah, or he had the trial because of this book, Al-Aqeedah al-Wasitiyyah. He went to prison once because of his fatwa about saying that a person who divorces their wife 3 times in one sitting, that it only counts as one divorce. And he has his evidence, right? But this is against the majority of the madahib. Well, people might think, I can't believe, why are they sending them to prison for this? Not defending the government for this, because, obviously, Shaykh al-Islam had his hujjah, but, at the same time, our Western concept that anyone should be able to say whatever they want about the deen is also incorrect, right? These hukam, they were doing this because they had some ghira for the deen, that love for the deen. The problem is they had been manipulated by some people of bid'ah, right? So Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah ta'ala, when he made, these statements, that the people and the ulama who were in the cabinets of the government, they'd say, oh, he made this statement, this goes against the madahib, this is kufr, this, etc., and he would get jailed for that. The last time he was in jail, he ended up dying in jail, was because of his fatwa that it is not permissible to travel to graves, right? You can visit graves, right? That's from the Sunnah. He never said you can't visit graves. It's from the Sunnah, but you can't make extensive travel to graves like the way you would to a masjid. So he said this and ended up being jailed for this and ended up dying in jail in the year 728 after the Hijrah. So as I said, he was 67 years old. May Allah Ta'ala have mercy on him. So we're going to talk on the next class, the week after next, about his trials based on this book, Al-Aqeedah al-Wasitiyyah. So I know, maybe people, some people can read Arabic better than others. And I know some books are very expensive, but anyone who wants to buy Majmu'ul Fatawa, the collection of Fatawa books of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, and it has all of his books, Al-Aqeedah al-Wasitiyyah, everything in it. It also has something very valuable in it that is not found in any of these methods of it, which is these trials that he went through about this book. And he writes them himself, each one of these court cases basically that happened and the details of those court cases. And it, like responding to every accusation they made about him. And it's like 200 pages, but we'll talk a little bit about it next week, inshallah. Sorry, time is running out. It's almost Maghrib time. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept from everybody. Next time, we'll leave a little more time for questions, inshallah. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Should I end the meeting?